I have great pleasure in welcoming you to this evening's fifth series in this particular set that we have on oil and gas and on oil and gas resources. Maurice Radebe will speak more about what we've done in this field and build the bridges between what we're doing tonight and what we've done in the past. As you know, WBS is engaged in a turnaround strategy in 2014, and as part of this, our new mission is to serve business and society and to engage in critical thought with our stakeholders. It therefore gives me great pleasure to hand over to our Executive in Residence, Maurice Radebe, to kickstart the proceedings for this evening.
Just to give a little bit of background, again, we always repeat this because it's important to see these seminars not in isolation. See them as a series of seminars that are aimed at, and I repeat all the time, making sure that the discoveries of oil and gas in this continent is used for the benefit of the advancement and development of our people. This seminar, it was by popular demand because people wanted to find out what opportunities are there. Entrepreneurs in particular asked me, we want to get opportunities in this industry. We want to enter this industry. We want to know whether small and medium enterprises can have the opportunity to participate. And we've got a panel of speakers here that is going to really answer that question. We've got Ibrahim, and Ibrahim is a Chief Executive Officer of South African Oil and Gas Alliance. And first of all, I'd like to thank you for sponsoring this event, and I think it's a good round of applause for you.
We are an industry-based organization that focuses on the upstream and midstream sectors of the oil and gas value chain. And we've been going for more than 10 years. We really started out of Cape Town looking at the ship and rig repair industry, which has now grown to a multi-billion rand industry. We've now also grown out into looking at the major projects, and I talk about some of those. So if we exclude coal to liquids, which is what Sasol produces, we don't really have a very defined, what I would call upstream sector with exploration and of oil or gas. At the top value chain that looks at crude oil, which is the crude oil value chain, and we are world class when it comes to refining and marketing, which is the downstream side. We import 380,000 barrels of oil every day, and we refine them at one of our refineries, and they get distributed through your retail outlets. What we do have in abundance is on the left-hand side is the industry that's developed to support the oil and gas activity, mostly in Africa. And now with some of the recent developments where we have offshore exploration in South Africa, we see that developing to support some of the local industry. So, as I mentioned before, rig and ship repair just in Cape Town and Saldanha Bay has grown from 600 million rand in 4 years ago to 2.2 billion plus. And that's just repairing rigs and ships that service the oil and gas industry in the region that pass through Africa. But if we look at localization, BE, and skills development, in the early stage, it is a very technically demanding field, and South Africa does not have much expertise. So to invest excessive resources early on might not be prudent. Again, for local manufacturing, procurement, technology, and skills development, as you move further down the chain and you can get more certainty, then you can look at significant aspects. In Europe and in other areas where oil and gas value chains have developed, they have created significant industries directly and significant economic development around the oil and gas value chain. And those multipliers have ranged from 7 to about 18 in some countries in terms of the multiplier around jobs and GDP growth from the oil and gas value chain. This is the map that looks at the 30 licenses that have been issued to 20 companies, and what's most significant is that we have PetroSA that took out a rig 2 weeks ago to drill offshore in South African waters, and also Total, which will take a rig into blocks 11 and 12B to also conduct exploration. Total's exploration will be the first private sector exploration in South Africa in more than 10 years. But shale gas could be the game changer. We are ranked between 5th and 8th, depending on the survey you read, at 390 trillion cubic feet. And to give you an idea of magnitude, Mossgas was built on 1 trillion cubic feet. So 390 trillion cubic feet is a significant number. These upgrades, we've done some numbers, will be in the region of about $700 million per refinery, or 7 billion rand. So there will be opportunities, but it will be mainly around EPCM and construction type work. The biggest project in sub-Saharan Africa at the moment is the liquefaction plant by Anadarko, and that's a $15 billion project. Mozambique's GDP is $13 billion. Anadarko estimate that about $550 million will be spent in South Africa over a 6 to 8 year period to support the development of that project. So that's a significant potential. Again, it will focus initially on the engineering side, but it also focuses on other areas. They recently issued a $180 million tender for security to secure the area around that project. So it cuts across different areas, including basic services and areas like security. These are companies that have set up in South Africa, either in the Western Cape or other regions like Johannesburg or Durban, to support oil and gas activities in the region.
Trinidad and Tobago is one of my favourite examples, in many ways a model for what Mozambique could do. You have an economy which is an entirely gas-based industry with very high opportunities for national citizens. But there is a warning. Local content does have boundaries, and it's important not to get too greedy. So if you look at the Mexican example, Mexico is one of the most fascinating global energy examples. At the last Mexican election, all three political parties said, we can no longer have the state running our oil and gas sector. We need the private guys in. But what they did do with the local content, even after producing for 70, 80 years, the local content target is only about 35%. So it's relatively restrained compared to the history of the sector. We did some work on each of offshore and also shale gas. Offshore, if South Africa finds a field that's broadly similar to the Jubilee field in Ghana, the entire balance of payments is wiped out in year one. You have fixed capital investment, which could be in the region of $15 to $25 billion per field, if you assume something like a 300 to 500 million barrel field. Similarly, on the shale side, if one looks at a 12 TCF block, our economists calculated that could on its own create about 210,000 direct and indirect jobs in this country. So the numbers are of a very serious order of magnitude. South Africa adopted renewables reasonably late by global standards, but had an absolute stunning success from the outset. To date, round about, I think it's about $10 billion of renewable energy has been procured or has closed. And what's noteworthy about those projects is that each and every project has specific local content targets. So you have local content targets around skills development, training, shareholding, empowerment, community involvement, procurement of goods and services. And this is something that's really interesting to follow. I think from our side, we are firm believers that there's going to be regional upstream developments here, whether it's shale, whether it's offshore, whether it's Mozambique, or a combination of them. We really believe this stuff. Importantly, the clients do, and the clients are spending investment dollars on making it happen. What we would say, though, is that in looking at this, the government has to exercise prudence in how it's done. We've had the example of the MPRDA, where the industry's been retarded for around about a year. Per the story on the screen from the FT yesterday, it appears the new minister has recognised the limitations of the existing legislation and what needs to be changed.
I like to use the Qatar example because it shows what the possibilities are for the Southern African region, not only from an economic perspective, but also from a geopolitical perspective. In 2001, Qatar's GDP sat at $17.5 billion US, and by 2011, as a consequence of the development of their gas fields, their GDP grew to $170 billion. If you take into account the fact that all these developments and all this progress in Qatar has occurred over a 10-year period, you only need to think about what the possibilities for Southern Africa are. They are extraordinary. Why I like this slide is that as a lawyer, every little block in that white, in the white blobs simply talks to negotiation, talks to agreements insofar as I'm concerned. So what this means is in fact that there is so much scope for lawyers to become involved in the oil and gas industry. There isn't a single area of law that I know that doesn't apply to the oil and gas sector. We need to make sure that when we are looking at a regulatory framework that recognizes and understands that we are conducting ourselves within the context of an industry that is in its infancy, not an industry that has been at play for 45, 50 years. So we cannot compare ourselves to Nigeria, we cannot compare ourselves to Angola, we've got to compare ourselves to South Africa. We need to put everything that we can in place to make sure that this capital-intensive upstream oil and gas industry is invested in. From a transformation perspective, we've got to take the bull by the horns. The reality is that the capital costs that are required for any player to invest in oil and gas are stupendously high, which is why you have so few players globally. And if that means that we need to focus on transformation and empowerment in the midstream and downstream sectors, then that is where we must focus all of our attention in recognizing what the realities of today are. Because if you look at jurisdictions such as Nigeria, it is after decades that Nigerian nationals are at a place where they are able to start building oil-producing companies. They didn't do that before. They relied on your Shells and your BPs because the capital costs of investment were so high.
Thanks, Paul. Can I tell you what somebody said today? They said, give a man a gun, they'll rob a bank, and give a bank a license, they'll rob everybody.
Well, the question was about what then must be done within the maritime sector.
I think sometimes we make important decisions, but because we don't have a crystal ball, we don't necessarily understand what the implications of these decisions are generations or decades down the line. And that's the unintended consequences of these majors having headquarters outside the country. That's the one problem we are facing. Now, this impact, what it has had on the industry is that there's no job creation.
The key thing, the future of energy, is called energy mix. There's going to be oil, gas, nuclear, coal, and renewable energy. And renewable energy, there's various forms. It's solar, wind, biofuels, recycling, and there'll be other forms as well. But the future of the world is going to require a lot of energy, and the energy mix is the way forward.
To date, we haven't yet started any meaningful drilling projects in order to identify what actually exists, either onshore or offshore, and that for me is the first step. In order for that to happen, we've got to ensure that we have a robust regulatory framework that encourages inward investment into South Africa. I think it's important that upfront there needs to be far more effort that's put into planning around education and redirecting our education outcomes to make sure that we create and develop professionals who are able to service this industry as effectively as possible.
If our hunch is right, this country is going to go through some extremely exciting energy developments.